Okay, I think we can start. We have an interesting program ahead of us for the full morning. Welcome to the 11th summit of EADTU-EU. We started this summit 11 years ago, actually on initiative by the Director-General, at that moment, as he believed that the members of EADTU are representing quite the innovations in higher education, and that is always on our agenda every year in the summit, exploring the latest developments and what is ahead of us, and look at the opportunities and challenges in that. And also for today, we have several umbrella organizations, universities, people from the European Commission and ENCPA, and so in the room, but we also have some 100 people online. Welcome also online, and there's also opportunity, I think, by the chat also to ask questions today via the online connection. And we are going to have on the agenda today first the opening, but then we're going to talk about retention and open and distance education, topic of personalization, which is an upcoming topic in relation to the possibilities of AI and big data. And later, after the break, we're going to talk about student and staff well-being, and shortly on e-seals and microcredentials before we have the closing panel. But let us start this morning with Theo for the official.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to this summit in Brussels, the annual summit. As you know, EADTU has a lot of activities. One of the main activities is this summit, of course, and also, of course, the annual conference this year in Cyprus, wonderful Cyprus. This summit is for us important as EADTU, for the General Assembly, for the rectors, for the organizations connected to EADTU, because this is a little bit, of course, looking forward to the future and the topics we are going to explore, but it's also a little bit bragging. Look us, EADTU, look at our activities, look at the good work we do. And that's also important, because now and then I have a feeling that we should step out the shade a little bit more as EADTU. We should really show what we are doing, because we are with a lot of researchers, we are with a lot of students, and we have a lot of organizations in EADTU and do wonderful work. We are the pioneers, I think, especially in online and distance education, but also in educational technology, in many other things, in microcredentials. And I think it's always worthwhile to come to Brussels and visit this summit. Of course, to show the world, but also to have a bigger, larger discussion with the outer world. We have a lot of interesting guests. George already told you. And we're going to start in a minute with the program. We're talking about retention. That's really important for open universities. We serve a lot of students. All of us, in total, we serve millions of students. But keeping them in and making them successful, that's another thing. So retention is for us important. And we established last year, I think, here in Brussels, a task force on retention. And now they show their results in their report and products. So I'm looking forward to that. And also, personalization. That's a new topic we want to explore. Of course, personalization is not a new topic in general. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody knows how to do it. Is individual learning the same as personalization? No, it's not. Do we do a lot of on personalization at our institutes? Yes. Can we do better? For sure. So we are going to establish also a task force on personalization. But first, today at 10, we have a kickoff on this topic, and we have a really nice presentation of colleagues before we start. And I hope that we can present a report on personalization, how to do it, and how to implement it next year at this summit in Brussels. So our summit is important. For now, enjoy this morning, enjoy our activity, and I hope we have a fruitful day in the discussion. And I want to give the floor to the next speaker, that's Stefaan Hermans, Director of Policy, Strategy and Evaluation in the Directorate-General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture of the European Commission. Sorry, Stefaan, we know each other, but your title, I always have to read it up, so that's too long. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. And I'm actually very glad that I'm the only one, not the only one, who has to think twice before I think what actually stands the. We have an abbreviation, which is EAC, and then it's education, culture, youth, sports. It's a bit complicated, right? So I'm happy I'm not the only one, but thanks for the invitation. I really want to thank the European Association of Distance Teaching Universities, you, George, and Theo in particular, for actually allowing me to participate in your summit here today. I've been amongst you before, and I'm very glad to be back because I know for sure that I will actually learn a lot today. I will learn a lot from you because I know from the past that what you're working on very often is indeed the pioneering work that you have been working on, maybe a little bit in shade and shadow, and then later on it becomes more and more mainstream, also on the European agenda. Think how we try to handle the pandemic also in education, and how all sorts of distance tools became very important on that. So in a certain way, you're a bit the avant-garde of, I think, a lot of other stuff that we see popping up on our radar screen later on, where we do believe that also at the level of the European Union, it merits our attention, because that is something that we can support member states and the education community as a whole by intensifying discussions, cooperation, sharing experiences, working together, and all those kind of matters. What's absolutely fascinating, and I think you outlined it already now as well, Theo, on some of the issues that we will be discussing, is that you do not only ask questions, but you also start answering them. And I mean, often in policy, you talk about policy making, but you forget that there is also implementation. And I think that's quite different, I think, from the way you're doing it also as universities, where it is not just talking about policy, but it's actually putting it in place in implementation at the same time. I mean, if you simply think about how do you reconfigure some of the teaching practices, particularly with technology, and how do you advance this, and how do you use different types of technologies for different types of purposes that you have, also on that, you're a pioneer. But I think it's fair to also underline something which we as also European Commission attach great importance to. That is that you're loyal to very strong anchor points that we need to have within education. For instance, it's value driven. It's a value for the individual, but it's also collective value that is in there. That is learner centered. Because at the end of the day, what matters is what do we get out of the education? What do individuals get out of the education? What is the outcome there? So it's learner centered. But also it's future focused. And I'll zoom in on that later on a bit more as well, obviously. And it's evidence informed. It's just not an idea, but there's also data that underpin it. There's an understanding that actually underpins it. This is in a world which, as we know, is becoming more and more fragmented. And that also means how important it is to be able to connect with one another. But also how we deal with uncertainties. So your topic for today is leading the future of learning, on this banner that you are having the summit here today. But no surprise, I guess, also at the level of the European Commission, we are also starting to think about the future. Particularly, what do we believe can create the most value of action at the level of the European Union in the next mandate? We've had the last plenary session of the European Parliament. Electoral campaigns are in full swing. We actually have one item that has been very dominant on the education agenda, for instance, on disinformation, that you also see popping up in this conversation on the preparation for the elections. And then for us, clearly, our label, so to speak, our banner is the European education area, which we have been working in the past years very intensively. And yes, there is some looking back associated to this. But it's also important to be able to look forward. But also only looking back, I just want to say a few words on that, because we do have an open public consultation ongoing at this moment in time that runs until 27th of June. So it's open to anyone who wants to reflect upon, comment on, have suggestions, ideas, appreciations, criticism, whatever it may be, on what we have been doing in the past period, and also obviously some suggestions that can be made within this context. We have already a political mandate from the Council. That is that the Council expects that in 2025, it actually will renew our strategic framework that we have at the level of the European Union on working on education and training. So how we take forward this European education area. And that's de facto, that means that very early in the new mandate of the next Commission, the Commission will have to present a proposal of actually setting out where we see the headlines for the period to come for the next strategic framework. I'll say a few things though already where our thinking goes at this moment in time. One of them clearly is it is evidence-based. What are the challenges that we are confronted with? And particularly what do we see challenges when it comes to the outcome of learning? I mean, one area, for instance, on basic skills, what we see, I mean, our young generation, what are they capable of doing? We've all heard about the PISA results. It's something I think is very worrying. It's very worrying, not just for the state of education, but also when you look for the economy, the businesses. I mean, here you are in a small and medium-sized enterprise, and you try to find somebody who can actually have a proper conversation with a customer. And when they say, well, if I take 1/8 out of that, and then say, well, 12.5%, and people look at them and say, well, what do you mean? You know, which one is it? Yeah, okay, that becomes very difficult in life. I mean, that's actually what you're looking at on 1/3, about 30% of young people who don't have basic enough. So just to say, I mean, this is an evidence-driven, and I can give you many examples of that. It does matter, obviously, as to what we try to identify as topics for the future. But clearly also, I think when you look at kind of a society where we're living in, how is society developing? We have spoken the last years a lot about the digital and the green transition, which will be continued ongoing. The dimension of artificial intelligence, for instance, also how do we integrate this into this personalization of the learning? I mean, it's one thing to just have an empty discussion or a vague discussion on artificial intelligence. It's quite a different discussion when you're actually starting to talk, what do you do in concrete situations? What kind of technology will you be using? How are you going to be dealing with this? I mean, it's a completely different conversation to have. And that's actually, I think, one that we need, and I'm glad that you have this on your agenda today. And then clearly also one, when does it matter for the European Union to actually also step into this discussion? Because there's so much that you can do by yourself, but there are certain topics which are typically a challenge for many, for everyone within the education community, but certainly when we can intensify cooperation, dialogue at the level of the European Union, common projects that we can do, that it clearly also plays a role of that. So where are we going? Clearly, I mean, there's a need to strengthen the foundation of education. I think it's clearly there. When you look at the data, we can have very long discussions on it, but it doesn't matter that young people are prepared for life. It doesn't matter. And we have to see exactly what we will be doing for this and how it can be made relevant for the society in which we live today. Because the basic skills, yeah, I mean, they're basic skills, but I mean, they're also within a given context. But also, I think certainly when you look at competences more in the advanced sector, specialized, and how do we keep updating and upgrading skill level, it's clearly, I think, an element that we need to continue to look at. We are in the European Year of Skills, but there's certainly more to be done and will continue to be done on that. And obviously, there's the typical transnational dimension, which I think most of us know under the mobility banner, but I think intensified cooperation is clearly also one of those. So, I mean, this is clearly, I think, the pattern in which our thinking goes on the renewal. So we'll have to see what kind of measures exactly have to fit in there on strengthening this European education area. And for that, I think the session of today is leading the future of learning, the well-being component, which clearly has come up very high on the agenda. It was already creeping up a bit before COVID-19, but certainly during and after, I think we have seen it much more prominent on the agenda. The opportunities that we get with the personalization, where, I mean, it's a big difference saying to everyone, here is a laptop or a tablet, and then to say, how do we actually use this in a much more personalized approach that can really be helpful to support learning outcome? I mean, that's a completely different discussion to be had. And I think we're gradually moving into that direction. It's good that you are focusing on this. And there's obviously also the question of recognition. You mentioned the micro-credentials. I mean, it's no secret that when you were advancing it, we thought this is really a topic that merits EU attention. As you do know, there is a recommendation approved by the Council on that. But having a recommendation is one thing. I mean, there's also clearly a matter of how do we do it and how do we continue on that. I'm not going to do the full list of what we have been doing over the last year and certainly not the last 5 years, but I just want to flag, for instance, the ongoing work on a follow-up of 2 council recommendations within the digital sphere, particularly on the digital ecosystem, I mean, Theo and all that kind of stuff and how you deal with it, but then particularly also on the skills. And I think it's also our objective that it's not just talking about digital education, but that digital is fully integrated within an education system, and that we take advantage of that. I think it's a bit of the same discussion as you may have on artificial intelligence. Those who say you shouldn't be using it in education, but as everybody else will be using it in the economy, we need that being a PD, that we have put that business opportunity to deal with it responsibly, to deal with it intelligently. Isn't that also an issue for us? Isn't it also an issue, I think, also on the skills that we develop in dealing with those matters? So that's also part of the issue. So I'm not going to list all the other stuff that we do on that. We can talk about it later if you want, but I think you probably know as well as I do what we have going on there. But I do want to underline though the importance of the micro-credentials. We'll have an opportunity to discuss this. I think there's still a long way to travel on the implementation. There are specific issues that need to be addressed. But okay, fact that it is moving, I think is a very good start, and then I think we'll take it from there. So I want to leave it to that, and leave the space, I think, for all the presentation that we have and the discussion that we can have with one another. And I know already for sure when I leave here later today that it will be with further ideas to integrate into our next strategy and our next agenda for the European Commission, which will be valuable for the entire education community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefaan. We go ahead. Like I told you before, personalization is an important topic. But first, we go to the task force on retention. Sorry, I had to put on my glasses. We developed a task force for retention last year, and it was led by FernUniverstität. And we have André Biederbeck from the FernUniverstität. He's going to tell us all about the report and what the task force found on retention and how to improve it. Okay, André, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Theo, for this introduction. So it's all in Spanish here, but I have it in English here as well. So it's not, I hope, a big challenge for me. So as you can see here, retention, open and distance education was the topic of the task force. Theo has already mentioned it, but what precisely did we do in the last year? First of all, I want to begin with why was the scope of this task force on retention and student services. Because research and our own day-to-day experiences show that study progress and preventing dropout is quite challenging in online distance education, as most of you might know. Therefore, the task assigned by the EADTU was to analyze the challenges and collect examples of good practice on how to increase retention at our universities, which are located throughout whole Europe, as you can see on the slide again. And our work has finally resulted in a report on retention and student services published, I think, on Monday, but you can look at it later. In the next couple of minutes, I will give you some brief insights into this report, and I hope my short presentation will like an appetizer for you to read more about it. So our first task was to collect and analyze research and add our own professional experiences in order to identify the strengths and obstacles in online distance learning in terms of study progress and retention. Of course, we had to define dropout, which isn't quite an easy task, you might imagine, and you will get to know on the next slide which definition we agreed on. Secondly, we collected approaches from different universities and compared them And we reached out to other experts, not only the task force members, but other experts at our universities in order to get as much information as possible. All this was done to support the development of strategies to improve study progress and to offer more agile student services. So here's the definition of dropout we have agreed on. We can widely define dropout as the non-enrollment of a student in a given number of successive semesters or courses. For Woodley and Simpson, quote, a student dropout is the elephant in the room, and dropping out is the norm, and the graduate is the divined in open and distance universities, sometimes reaching nearly 50% of new students dropping out before the end of the courses. So the factors for dropout are varied, and sometimes they differ greatly, as research emphasizes. Among them are personal and external factors, here colored in blue, and on the other side, personal and university-related factors, which are in green color here. For instance, coping with workload is a common factor, often because students have wrong expectations about the time they have to spend for studying in online distance learning. Others don't want to obtain a full degree. And moreover, you have to keep in mind our students are usually different in many terms to those in traditional higher education institutes of age, employment, socioeconomic status, family, and so on. However, it's not always the student to blame. Many reasons for struggling and finally dropout could be reduced if we as universities offer our students even more flexibility, especially in terms of examination and the size of modules. Furthermore, motivation and self-regulation as well as interaction is crucial for study progress, which is quite a challenge as most of our distance learning universities have to handle high student numbers with few academic staff at the same time. So what can be done about retention to increase retention? We have identified two main approaches, which can be described briefly as curriculum design and learning analytics. As mentioned before, a significant number of students do not want to pursue the goal of a degree for a variety of reasons. For them, certificates can offer a suitable alternative as these studies still provide them with the proof of qualification at a university level. Furthermore, such certificate programs are more manageable entry to academic education, to motivating intermediate degree. They also offer students who have difficulties or are unable to meet the demands of their studies, qualification after leaving university, which is what we can see at FernUniverstität, for example, as we have implemented such certificates 2.5 years ago. Offering smaller modules with less than 10 ECTS points can also help to make students or learning successes visibly more quickly, because small modules, and I think that's obvious, take less time. They are also able to increase student motivation as research emphasizes. The use of data and appropriate analytics on the other end can provide insight into how and where agile student services should focus their staff and student energies to gain the greatest impact on success. For instance, at Open University UK, the strategic analytics team began to share data insight about student performance relating to continuation of study and qualification competition rates. This insight shows the correlation between certain stages of the student's learning and the fact that the largest impact can be achieved when priorities are focused on the first module studied, and specifically on supporting students between the registration and the successful submission of the first assignment. Foster the effect of such an initiative, faculty support units should build a community of practice, including all the staff who are contributing to the first semester experience. In addition to these two general approaches, we came across many more measures, which we summarized in the main chapter of the report. For the main chapter, we used the student life cycle, as you can see here on this slide, to describe the stages where students drop out. However, these stages are also where we can intervene with specific measures to increase retention. As mentioned before, we collected good practices from our universities, and with the report, we make them accessible to you and the general public. Due to the limited time for this presentation, we can only dive into the two first stages, Nonetheless, I hope this brief insight and the prospect of learning more about our approaches at our universities will encourage you to read and learn more about this in total. So let's continue with awareness, aspiration, and expectation management. It's greatly important to draw a realistic picture and to address specific target groups in specific ways, considering their special interests, needs, goals, knowledge, and availability. With specific marketing campaigns, we aim to encourage underrepresented groups such as women in STEAM, people with migrant background, and refugees. In order to convey a realistic impression of studying at distance in online university, open courses, or learning materials are offered, providing a detailed and representative insight into the learning model and the level of instruction. Prospective students are urged to use these online open educational resources, not only to check if they have already gained enough prior knowledge and the technical skills, but also to find out whether they can motivate and organize themselves adequately in an online learning setting. All three of them, prior knowledge, self-motivation, and self-management, are critical for retention, and they should be considered during the study orientation phase. Additionally, an increasing number of our universities offer online self-assessments. They give prospective students the opportunity to check if their expectations and assumptions match with the requirements of distance learning in general and in terms of the subject they are interested in. Subject-based online self-assessment tend to focus on subject-relevant interests and prerequisites, and therefore support prospective students to find the degree fitting to their individual goals. In comparison, more general online self-assessments are more about general attitudes to distance studying, and they describe the level of flexibility, for example, in terms of course and assessment. By receiving extensive feedback, the users get to know their own strengths and weaknesses better, and they reflect on their career and learning goals. Afterwards, they can, of course, get into contact with student counseling to clarify any open questions and to make their final decision against or for an enrollment. Talking about preparation leads us to the second stage, pre-entrance guidance and preparation. As students differ in terms of their prior knowledge, the non-compulsory preparation courses start at different levels. For example, at FernUniverstität in Hagen, the preliminary mathematics course starts at or focuses on mathematical content on the lower secondary school level, while the bridging course focuses on equations, inequalities, and functions. However, mathematics and statistics are not the only skills addressed. Data literacy, digital skills, as we have already heard here, and also English language proficiency are crucial for success today and are addressed in this, on this stage. Furthermore, the preliminary and bridging courses are also tailored to the students' individual requirements in terms of their availability and use. The courses are self-paced and can be taken throughout the year, and prospective students can refresh previously acquired knowledge even before the decision for enrollment is finally taken. As students generally only need to refresh and acquire some of the prerequisite knowledge, the courses are mostly have a modular design. While the bridging courses focus on subject-related skills, the orientation courses, or modules they are called, provide more general study skills in order to lower the dropout rate. For example, they explain how to use the learning management system, how to take a course, how to do literature research, or how to connect with fellow students. At some universities, it's not only highly recommended for all freshmen to take such introduction courses, they are automatically enrolled, but of course it's not necessary to work on the whole material delivered. Considering the high percentage of students in full or part-time employment, time management, learning techniques, and self-organization, self-management are amongst the key skills addressed in these courses. Improving support regarding students' post-graduation expectations, that means the labor market, has also been identified as a plus for retention, but contributes to increase student satisfaction and motivation. This is why career services address students right from the beginning of their studies. Also because professional reorientation can be a lengthy process that runs parallel to their studies. Career services, of course, are also connected to the stage progression, as you might have imagined. But for now, our journey through the report is over. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you are interested to read more about the report, you can follow this link here or visit the EADTU website. Thank you very much.
That was a teaser. My God, I have 1,000 questions, but we don't have the time for that. So no, this is it. Please stay. I give you. I ask one question.
Okay.
If you would have to pick just one urgent measure we could take that would have the most success, according to you, which one would it be?
I was very impressed by the data analytics by the Open Universiteit UK, because it's, I would say, an approach which has integrated all which is necessary to analyze the data, to reach out to the students, to involve all the staff contributing to the first semester experience. I think this is really a main approach, and as far as I understand it, it's successful. So I would call it, this is one of which is needed for all our universities.
Perfect, thank you very much. It's also a nice bridge to the next talk, of course. It's about exactly that topic. Thank you, André. I think during the coffee break, you will be the most popular guy because a lot of people will ask questions to you. Thank you for the great report. Thank you for the whole task force for the writing. And I really can recommend this report. It will be online. Or it's online since Monday, or it will be online next Monday?
It's online on Zenodo. I just put the link in the chat for the people that are online. So the people that follow us online have it already. And for you, I'm going to put it on the EADTU website.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Then we go into personalization of education by AI and big data, and that's of course important to get insights of how people study. And I give the floor to Lourdes Guàrdia from the University of Oberta, Catalyna, the guest of today's location, of course, the book. Roland, Ettema, and Zuzanna Glogowska from my university, Arden University.
So good morning. First of all, thank you for inviting us to be part of this summit. So it's a pleasure. So our talk today is more focused on personalization, but as you know, and our president mentioned before, so it's usual that the audience thinks first as to attend individual needs for learning. And in this sense, as institutions, open and distance education and online learning, we have a very huge amount of students in our classrooms. So we have specific profiles, and this sometimes it's very difficult to talk about individualization, because it just means that it's not scalable and sustainable enough to offer this kind of individualization sometimes people is talking about. So in this sense, we would like together, we agree that maybe it's interesting to highlight that personalization in our context is more learner-centered, because it's our models as institution, open education institutions, our model is based on learner-centered. That it means that the student is select and choice, and it's regarding about metacognitive skills, that what's happening when they are progressing and what they need, and even for their careers in lifelong learning. So because we have these specific profiles, and in this sense, when we talk about personalization, it means that the teacher is facilitating ideas and give clues for the progress, but it's not leading the learning. So it's not, for me, it'd be more prescriptive approach if we are addressing this as an individualization. Of course, personalization and individualization as similar strategies, But in this sense, we are more focused that we would like that the student in our institutions would be more autonomous, and we are promoting the autonomy for them. And in this sense, this is our approach. And of course, we can see opportunities if we build artificial intelligence and big data, because personalization is something that we studied for decades. So we would like always to personalize education. But right now we have the opportunity that artificial intelligence and big data or learning analytics is providing deeper insights about what happened and how the progress of learning is going on. And this allows to customize instruction to support individual and group learning. But also we have challenges in this sense and considerations we should be in mind is about data privacy. This is not easy. We have mandates and European mandate that we have to accomplish. And sometimes institutions are not ready enough to offer this data privacy. You have to ensure that this is established. Also, teacher readiness is something that should be taken into account. We are offering a lot of data, but sometimes teachers see a lot of numbers and they don't know exactly what to do and what it does mean. So in this sense, the institution should be ready to offer training in this sense. Also, equity and access is something that it seems easy, but it's not like that. So, and we have the opportunity that everybody can access to these institutions. And it doesn't matter the background, socioeconomical status, and so on. And this is the mission of our open education institutions. And also another consideration that I mentioned before is the scalability and sustainability. We think that when we have this amount of students, it's very difficult to be scalable. We have a limit, we have a top. And in this sense, sometimes we don't have teachers enough to attend individually these needs, and this is why we have to profile a little bit and then to decide if we offer different paths, we offer different learning resources and so on to attend more or less this group of students we identified. Also, it's very important bias. This is something that developers should take into account and to try to mitigate a little bit this because this is something that is we are very worried about that. Also, transparency for all the stakeholders should know how it means to personalize education. In this sense, we have to provide clear guidelines to them, and also accountability. So this is just to mention some. As you can see, this is a comparative table of how AI and LA support personalization and individualization of learning. As you see, we have focus, the role in personalization for both, and the role in individualization, the benefits for teachers and the benefits for students, but also limitation. And let me say that we have a spectrum that we can say that we have differentiation, personalization, and individualization in this scale. So it means that from less customization, we can go to the highest customization, and personalization is in the middle, it's mid-range customization. So our approach is in this sense is here. So we would like to be more than just differentiate just some group of people, so students, and this is why we think personalization in this sense is mid-range and customization, and we are very comfortable with that, and we can assume it very well. And I would like to present the perspectives from teachers and to give you some examples, and then I would like to give the perspective from students, because sometimes students are in the second place and it's not in our model. So the students is also a part of this learner-centered approach of personalizations, and this is why we have to provide data also to them to decide about what the progress is going on. And in this sense, I give you first the support for teachers, so how learning analytics and artificial intelligence is supporting them. First, for example, providing by mapping student competencies, educators can better understand their strengths, weaknesses, and areas for growth, supporting lifelong learning. And from this competency map, then we can provide them adaptive learning technologies that can dynamically adjust the content, pace, and difficulty level based on a student performance and progress. And also with the artificial intelligence, taking into account this competency map and these adaptive learning technologies, we can take data to assess and we can identify individual or group learning needs and gaps, enabling targeted interventions and personalized learning pathways. We can also provide learning analytics to the teachers with real-time data. Then I will show you some examples on student performance and how they are engaged and they are progressing, and empowering them to make informed evidence-based decisions always. And with this data, then we can use the learning analytics to personalize interventions, so teachers can identify struggling students and implement targeted strategies to address their learning needs. And finally, with this information, we can refine instructional approaches, because as teachers, we have to assure that everything is going on as was expected in the previous learning design. And this is something that we should guarantee. And this is why, for example, we are providing them, this is an example we use in our institution, when they take data and they realize that something is going wrong, or they feel that students are not engaged enough, for example, they observe that the results or the final outputs of the activities are not good. We are providing, these are just 12 active pedagogies that they can check. Of course, there are more, but it's just to give some ideas about how they can maybe change their activities when they feel that they are not going very well. Okay, and in this sense, if our model is centered on the student, so then it's something that is related also to the design principles, because we are using learning methodologies that are very active and very engaging, so that the owner of this process is the student, and this is why we have to guarantee this kind of pedagogies. And for the same purpose, teachers should know what are the learning design principles to make activities more engaging in an online context or a distance open education. If data inform us about a low engagement of the students, then these principles should be taken into consideration also. Probably not all principles should be included, of course, but teachers should check if activities include some of them or not. So are these activities relevant enough? Are they challenging because they are proposing competitions, gamification, research, or conveying intentions to be engaged and alive? So this is something that we recommend to our teachers when they are refining the learning approaches, the teaching methods. So this is some support that is provided from our e-learning center, that we have learning designers, and we are providing to our teachers guidelines, individual support. When they realize that something is wrong and they receive this report or this data, we can check through learning analytics dashboards. For example, this is one of the dashboards we use. This is a follow-up report online. We are using Power BI. This Power BI is integrated to Canvas. We moved from our on-site platform to Canvas because this was one of the challenges. So to have the opportunity to integrate applications that could extract data from the platform and to offer this data to the teachers, but not just to the teachers. Here, for example, we even can realize if the risk of plagiarism is high or not. And in this sense, then we have to decide actions in this direction, for example. Also, if there are delays of the deliveries of the assessment, for example, and other issues, the risk of dropout and so on. And we can decide to make actions evidence-based and in a different levels. Because, for example, we have also the visualization for deans, for vice deans, for program directors, from the teachers are responsible to the subjects and so on, because sometimes we also realize that maybe we have to decide in a macro level, the institutional level, I don't know, to provide more training, for example, because we realize that the teacher readiness is not so good. So in this sense, we need to provide this specific training, and we, for example, this kind of dashboards allows us to see if they are making decisions in this sense or not. And this is we are very happy now. We have this information we didn't have in the past, and in this sense, I can see that as experience as a teacher and a vice dean of the psychology and education, I can see that it's very, very useful, and we are contributing to our IT services and the specialists in learning analytics. What kind of data we also need that is not provided here, because we see that it is very relevant for us. And in this sense, we're experimenting and we're piloting again and again. And we are sure that the potential is very high. In this sense, we are very confident. Also, this is the part of the teachers, and now is what are the benefits for students. We can say that, for example, continuous assessment, it's interesting because we are not providing feedback every day. In this sense, if we are providing different kind of activities, we can automatize some feedback that maybe can make a photo for the students that the progress is going on very well or not. If they need support, they ask for this support. And we are providing this personalized feedback because intelligent systems can generate tailored feedback also and recommendations to help the students understand their progress and areas for improvement. In this sense, from the research by Rector this year, is funding a research project that are in this sense addressed to, for example, how AI can support feedback, for example, when students are preparing the proposal of the final master thesis, for example, how artificial intelligence can support them in providing the first feedback, and then teacher can validate this feedback and can add more recommendations. So we are doing research in this direction and others, so other elements we are proving and experimenting. I imagine as you are experimenting all. And in this sense, we have also very nice expectations. So we'll see what's happening in a few months. Also, automatic grading, it's interesting that because AI can provide consistent and objective evaluations of the student work during the learning process, especially for self-assessment, as I mentioned. But final evaluation and validation should be done by teachers. Don't forget that. So, just to mention three more, we've been working on that for many years. This is to provide dashboard for students. I will show you an example. Also, the potential of e-portfolios that now supported by learning analytics and artificial intelligence can provide personalized recommendations and suggestions to help students identify the strengths and address weaknesses and set meaningful goals. And how we can connect this for lifelong learning. So e-portfolios is a way or a strategy that's not just for assessment, just to check if I'm okay or not, or I have a gap here or not. So it's the idea of to connect to lifelong learning, because in our institutions, for example, it's something that is our mission as open education, distance education. So, and we think that e-portfolios can be also supported by LA, and artificial intelligence would be very, very important to provide them these opportunities. So this is just an example of a dashboard we provided to the students. For example, it was a project funded by the European Commission and Horizon 2020, which was very, very successful project with more than 20,000 students involved, around 2,000 teachers, and more than 500 schools. So, and this was very successful because we decided to provide a dashboard for teachers, but also for students. And these are the areas of the digital competence. As you know, everybody knows Digicomedu. So, and this is based on Digicomedu, but we landed Digicomedu to K-12, okay, primary and K-12. And this is a way that the students can see all the time how it's going the progress. And they can compare, for example, the scores, class average, school average, and they, for example, got a badge when they finish one of the areas. And if they complete all the areas, finally they got a micro-credential. So at this, I can assure that the students were very, very engaged with this. Even the tasks related to the different areas, some of them were gamified and were very integrated in the curriculum. This was not something that was done a part of the normal curriculum. They were working on digital competence during they were learning language, math, and so on. So this was perfect. This is not an added activity outside the curriculum. So this was wonderful. So this is to give some studies and publications that shows that this was very interesting for students. Then this is another example of a competence assessment system. It's very visual. We have here, this is very small. I will show you later the bigger photo. So student can see at any moment how it's progressing in the different competence related to the subject. Yeah, it's finished. And this is an e-portfolio that is connected the visualization of this progress of the competence to the personal e-portfolio. So this is just examples that we are thinking in personalized education also in this sense, using also these strategies and supported by learning analytics and artificial intelligence. So thank you so much.
Well, as you can imagine, as we saw the presentation of the Euro, we are very impressed about the completeness in this area, in this player field. So learning analytics is around us, and digitalization also, AI, etc. And so we had to adapt to this presentation of the Euro, and we going to more dive into the iceberg. Because when we saw the presentation, we see that the promising world is above the surface. Yeah? And we deal with a lot of questions below the surface. And that is what we're going to present you in a more practical way, what we are facing in the institution dealing with data towards personalized data, personalized education, sorry, and facing big data problems that we face daily in our department. So let me first set the stage. Who are we? We are Roland and Zuzanna, working at the Information Expertise Center, and which is a department which is dealing with collecting all the data of all the institutional systems in Open University. So if it's the examination system or the learning management system, some plugins in the learning management system, all the data, we extract them from the systems and we need to process them into dashboards. And it's presented as a service center, so we service the faculties with their questions. So to set the stage for this presentation, the context in our institution is we got a new learning management system, Brightspace, which became full operational in 23-24, beginning of this academic year.
And also we dream of an education that should be not one size fits all experience, but tailored to the individual needs and aspirations of students. Also dealing with the well-being of students, etc. It's all complemented in our dream. We have a focus here in this presentation. We focus in the realm of personalized education and exploring the technical challenges below the surface. And this is where Zuzanna comes in, telling about 3 topics. It's how do you track students when they learn in the learning management system below the surface. So we do not present dashboards, but we go lower. How do we measure the progress of students? Then, okay, if we understand in our cases 15,000 students in our LMS and how to follow them in each of their courses which they enroll, how do we aggregate that data towards the dashboards that you see? And then we also see that aggregating data and translating data into information, we need to make assumptions. And you need to know these assumptions as when you read the dashboards, because that's a topic of transparency. It could create biases. And this is what Zuzanna will explore with the aggregation difficulties. And then, since we're dealing with a lot of students and deans and teachers and faculties, need to have an idea of groups of students, because the group in total is too large. So we have to cluster students as an approach, because we cannot deal with each individual of them. So we need to grasp, for example, progress, dropout predictions, etc., by grouping students. Otherwise, the numbers are too big for teachers. So, what is our story of today? We are not talking about what's above the surface, but we're going to explore what's below the surface and what you need to know to establish such dashboards, because otherwise you deal with giant biases and transparency problems in what you're going to read and to interpret in these dashboards. So we do it together, and Zuzanna, maybe you can tell us through the 3 topics.
Yes, thank you, Roland. So first topic is about tracking learning, and here I would just like to share some experiences with you about how we dealt with high amount of data that's purely raw. So there's just event logs coming in, and there's not really information in it or at least yet. So as Roland mentioned, we have this new learning management system, Brightspace. Currently, we have there 400 courses, which you might say is quite a bit. But if you actually look at the content that's in them, we have more than 9,000 modules. A module is comparable to a chapter or maybe a week. Within these 9,000 modules, we have more than 35,000 topics. And on top of that, if you look at all these topics, each of them have a lot of learning activities, between 3 to 5. So if we actually look at our data, we have more than 100,000 learning activities. And of course, it's a big challenge for data scientists and also for educational experts is how can we really compare these different paths of students, and how can we also compare this data? Because in the end, you want to be able to compare it to something and benchmark it. So now let's talk about categorizing. Of course, the first step you always need to do is to look at the data. Most of people would actually look at the back end, so they would just look at the data, make an export. But we thought, okay, let's start just looking at the front. What's the stuff that the students see? And here I have some examples of 2 courses. The blue one is one course, it's from the informatics department, and the second one is from the management. Of course, we cannot see the content, but when we actually looked at it, what we saw, even though the content is different, the learning activity that's behind it is the same. So we have determined that actually, even though the content is different, it's the same activity. Then we have further looked at different types of pages that are available to students. So here's another example where we see a video that the student can see, and here another example where there's also a video. There we have determined that the student has to actually watch a knowledge clip. So actually that led us to an idea of categorizing data based not on what's in the content, but on type of the learning activity. And that has brought us to approximately 9 categories. Here you can see only 8. One is not included. It was the one that we couldn't define what the learning activity was. So that was approximately 10% of the data. But essentially every student, they always begin somewhere and they end, and in between they do a lot of different activities such as reading, executing, participating, feedback activities, or assessment. So essentially that enabled us to go from 100,000 data points to 9 categories. So how do we actually do it? We took a simple approach of 4 data mapping steps. We looked at the titles, at the content that we had available, and then we looked if the topic within the page had a linkage to a quiz or an assessment, or maybe a discussion forum or these kind of activities. So we could map to a high degree of certainty that this is the learning activity that the teacher had in mind. Then the second step was to look at the file extension. So we saw, for example, was a PowerPoint presentation that was linked to this topic. Without looking at what's the text written behind it, we could say that the student had to watch a presentation, or maybe they had to execute some Python code or anything like that. The third step was to look at the linkages to external tools. So we have a lot of different tools that are available for the teachers at the Open University that they can use for providing course materials, recording videos, for the examinations. So we have looked at the titles or the topics on the page and linked to different tools. And as the last step, and this was the highest step, that was approximately 80% of the data, we looked at the topic titles. So anything that was not being able to be mapped, we actually had to do it manually based on keywords. And you might say, oh, but what does it actually mean? Well, we looked at different topics. So we looked, for example, at the title learning unit or a chapter or a study unit, and we have determined that the student has to do a reading activity. In this case, it's reading study content. And you might ask, how does the data look, or what can we actually do it, and how is it really related to personalization in the end? Well, the link is not very straightforward, but here I have an example of a simple diagram that can be used by data scientists to extract information to provide to the teachers about their course content. So on the left graph, you can see this one in blue. You can see the different learning activities and number of interactions that are done by all the students within one course. And on the right side, you can see the same. It's unfortunately in Dutch, but what you can see is that on the right side, there's a big bar in blue and green, sorry, and it's related to reading activities. On the other side, in the other course, the number of reading activities and interactions was much lower. What can we do with this data? We can provide the information to the teacher. If you compare yourself to a course that's similar in structure, we can see that your students are not interacting with the content as much. And what does it mean? Well, they can have different, of course, interpretations, but one of the interpretations that we have made is that actually the students who are interacting less with the content were less likely to pass. So this enables the teacher to find out that if I include this type of activity and enable the student to complete it more, the chance of passing is actually higher. But of course, we also wanted to follow the students through the course structure. So not only compare it and give the information to the teacher, but also look at what is the student actually doing. So based on the data that we have aggregated it, and we had approximately 1.2 million events, which is quite a bit considering we had the information only from June last year. And of course, the challenge was how can we actually follow the students in the course content? So based on the categorization that we have made, we have just took a simple approach of stacking all the activities together and just looking what is the student doing. And we can see that this one student, he started with the orienting activity, then was doing reading, then assessment, reading, orienting, executing, and then he passed. So then we took another student just to simply compare and see if this pattern will actually lead it to success. And the conclusion was that we cannot use this data to conclude anything because there are many different paths that students are taking, and that even though the aggregation is already helping, we couldn't really conclude anything. So we have decided to use a different approach, which is called data mining, and it's widely used in business to determine different processes that our students are taking and what are the deviations. So what we have expected is something like this. It should be quite linear. The student is doing A, B, C, and D. But unfortunately, this was the reality. So the students, even though that we have aggregated to these 9 categories, we will still unable to determine what is the path that the students should really take in order to be successful. So that leads me to my next part, which is aggregation of these learning paths. Of course, again, we had a challenge. Our 8 or 9 categories, they were not good enough to determine any actionable insights for the teacher. So we have looked at different educational sciences, and what we saw is that if the student is doing more of a passive activity and is making a change to an active type of learning, his rate of learning is actually increasing. So we have decided to map these 9 categories to simple 2 categories, passive or active learning. So then a process diagram of the student would look more like this: passive, 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 active, passive. Basically, there is some sort of pattern in there. And we saw this student has passed. We had another student who was only doing passive activities. And passive activities is simply, for example, reading. It's not actually doing anything like doing quiz or doing an assessment. It's just simply passively reading. Then we had another student who also had a different pattern. So we said, okay, this already is giving us information that the students actually might be influenced by the type of activity they're doing. And we are actually successful because the learning pattern of these students was actually much different. Here we have a sample of 1,300 students from one faculty. And you cannot see on this graph, but we can also filter based on passing or failing. And we have seen that the students who are making a switch from passive to active activities are actually more successful in obtaining their certificate. And what does it mean for the teacher? It means that the course design should focus on having activity that's first passive and then active. And of course, this is not the same for all the courses. Depending on the domain and faculty, this information is different. But we can provide this type of information, personalized information to the teacher so they can adjust their learning, their teaching process. We have also very briefly looked at the course design. So what you can see on this diagram is the course design. So the student has to go through the first activity, second, third, fourth, and so forth. But what we can actually see is from 158 students that they have started this course, only 106 students went to the second activity, like the teacher has planned. After the second activity, some students jumped to the fourth activity, and a lot of students, so approximately 11, they jumped to the fifth activity. And what does it mean? That means that actually the actual execution of the course planning that the student does is much different than the teacher has designed for this course. And what can the teacher do with this information? We can, of course, here again filter whether the student has been successful or not successful in the previous round of the course. And then we can give that input to the teacher so they can just reshuffle maybe the course contents so the students are more likely to be successful in their course.
Maybe a short now for teachers, policymakers, etc. What's the difficulty? Here you can see a gap between what you see in the dashboards. For example, in week 7, you deal with a number highly unlikely that he's going to pass. Yeah. You sit here, and the information is only on this side available to you. This is the future. If you don't understand what is below the hood and how data is collected, how it's interpreted, how it's calculated, etc., you don't have any clue what this number means. This is the hard reality. So how fancy the dashboards might look like, you can go to the UK, where I went also, with the family, where I was very impressed by the dashboard. Very impressed with the dashboard. But if you don't have any clue how the data is collected, calculated, and presented to you, this number means nothing. That's the hard reality. So it's very hard to establish transparency, to avoid biases, etc., in the complete information line from the LMS system to any highly information that you can present towards teachers, which can have a meaning. And even it's worse that in the academic year, when you change anything in the software version, etc., then you see other numbers. So a harsh message, but it should be told. You need to build up your information system, your data lineage in your own institution. You need to know what every step is done, and it should be transparent. Okay, last topic.
Yes, the last topic, and indeed we're still searching of how can we adjust the data, how can we extract it, and how can we make it fit to the needs of the teachers and the students. We have tried, of course, the last approach, which is a clustering of students. And this has already been done before, but the question here is, can we use this clustering as a technique to provide information to the teachers that is actually usable and actionable? So our colleagues from the Theo Universiteit in Amsterdam, they have done a similar approach already approximately 10 years ago, where they have used a self-organizing map as a clustering algorithm to essentially put students in low clusters, so we can determine whether the student has, for example, a lot of time, is willing to study, or what is the profile of the student with pure purpose of customizing the learning experience. So we tried the same approach, and this is what happened. Essentially, the student was put into one of two buckets. So what you can see in blue is a part of our students that are categorized that you're fitting in this cluster, and then there's the second part. But the question is, what does it mean? And I honestly do not really have an answer for that. Why? Because we're still exploring of how can we really make information out of this. So I'm very briefly going to explain what is happening in the background. So what you just saw was an aggregation of all the information put together. But what we can do is we can take all the information apart, and this is exactly what you see. In the left top corner, we have the division of students who have obtained a certificate. In blue, you can see the students who did not get a certificate. Essentially, they failed. In the green and red, you have a selection of students who have passed. On the right side, what you can see is the students who have taken an exam. So red, that means the student took an exam. And blue, or well, actually in any other color than red, that means the students did not take an exam. And that's important for in a minute. On the bottom left, what you can see is the activity type of orienting. So the students in blue, they did less than 2 orienting activities. So they did not they didn't do a lot of work in the learning management system. And in green, they did between 7 and 12. So they actually did a lot of activities. Now we also have the doing activity, and that's the active type of activity. I'm sorry, it's also red. Red is actually very interesting because they did 16 orienting activities. So they're passively learning and orienting in what they should be doing. On the right side, we see the activity type doing, so this active type of learning, and in blue, they did less than 13 activities. In green, there was 25 to 38 activities, which is pretty high amount of activities for the students. And red or orange, that's 50 activities. And why is it important now? Of course, regular teacher would not be able to understand. But what we can provide based on this information is actually personalization of how the teacher should nudge their students in order to achieve a special goal. And now I'm going to briefly highlight something here. So what you can see here in the white circle is the number of students who did not take an exam. But if you compare it to the bottom right, you can see that some of them, especially in the left corner of that square, they actually did a lot of activities, so they're pretty active. And the same here, you can see that in orienting activities, they also did a lot of activities. But actually what happened is they didn't get a certificate. So as a teacher, if you have this information that this specific group of students is very active and actually have a very high chance of passing, but they're simply not doing their exams, they're not trying to do it. So as a teacher, you can nudge them, and this is the personalized information about your specific cohort that the student is actually likely to pass. They just need to do the exam. Of course, there's a couple of outliers. This is my last example. We can see here that a lot of students did not take an exam. No, they actually did take an exam. They did more than 50 activities of the active type. They did a lot of orienting activities, but actually they have failed. So what does it mean? These students, maybe they need a different learning approach or a different teaching approach because they're very active, they're taking the exams, but they're still failing. So my last remark for that is, of course, I understand that teachers cannot understand this simply because it's quite complicated, but this is our job as educational specialists, as data scientists, also as policymakers, is to define this approach of how can we turn this raw data into information and into action so that everyone can access it and personalize education.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. To give us an insight in the opportunities, the challenges, but also the difficulties in working with data. It's very complex also. So you need really also probably specialized people to work with data and data science. Hopefully we have them. So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions now during the coffee break. So we have now a short break of 30 minutes, and then we will come back for the next interesting topic, that's student well-being. Thank you. Okay, everybody's back again. Hope you had a lovely coffee. Thank you for joining us again for, well, one of the last presentations, but it's an important presentation. We welcome Kate Lister from Arden University and visiting the Open University of UK. Topic is student and staff mental well-being in online, open and distance higher education. An important topic. It became more and more important after, of course, the COVID crisis. So we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I hope you all had a good coffee break. Sorry to drag you away from your coffees, but I hope you were feeling rested and relaxed coming back into the session now. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you about one of my favourite subjects in the world, which is mental well-being of both students and staff in online, open and distance higher education. So my name is Kate Lister. I'm a Professor of Education. I'm looking at things to remember all my titles. I'm the Associate Dean and Director of EDI at Arden University, which is a smaller distance and blended institution in the UK, about 30,000 students. And I'm also a visiting professor at the Open University, and I'm going to be presenting research from both the Open University and Arden University for you today. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about student wellbeing, particularly distance learning student wellbeing. As I'm sure you're aware, mental health and wellbeing of university students has been an increasingly important topic in the media. It's very high profile. There's a lot of publicity around it. There's a lot of news. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of media around it. And this has been going on for more than 10 years now, sort of 15 years we're looking at. And there was a little bit of a gap in the sector, that most of the attention has been really focused on campus-based university students, and there's not been, until COVID, as much attention on distance learning university students. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit of the research I did when I was at the Open University, working between 2018 and 2021 to identify what the barriers and enablers were to mental wellbeing for distance learning students. So this was a project that had 3 research questions. First of all, what barriers and enablers to mental wellbeing do students experience? What are the solutions to these barriers that staff and students could co-create and put into practice? And how could these solutions be embedded in distance learning? So I interviewed 21 staff and students and ran a survey of 584 students and also with 666 staff, although I haven't put that on there. And that revealed a wide variety of barriers and enablers to mental wellbeing in distance learning. And the interesting thing was that most of the themes that came out were actually the same. They could be barriers or enablers, depending on how they were designed and how the students experienced them. So hopefully you can see this. If it's a little bit small, I can share the link with you afterwards, because some of the text I appreciate will be a bit small. But you can see the bottom side of this wheel here, this taxonomic wheel, shows you about barriers. There's 3 broad areas. There's environmental barriers, which include spaces, such as physical spaces, the isolation involved. People, obviously, people can be a huge barrier or enabler to mental wellbeing, depending on the people and how you engage with them, right? Systems, university processes, university procedures, they could be a barrier. They could also be an enabler when they were there to genuinely support students and when they were user-centered and easy to manage. Life in general, life circumstances and also your background circumstances could be both barrier or an enabler to mental wellbeing in higher education, again, depending on what those circumstances were. The middle section here, the purple section, you've got skills-related barriers and enablers, broadly divided into 3 categories of social skills, self-management skills and study skills. And then perhaps the most crucial area for us are these brown sections here, which are the study-related barriers and enablers. And it's amazing how much overlap there is with some of the retention statistics, some of the information there about what supports the student to keep studying. And because they are a lot of the things that will make a student drop out of university are also the things that cause barriers to mental wellbeing in higher education as well. So there's barriers related to the curriculum, to the activities, to the content, to the design of the curriculum, to the tuition, the tutorials, and the way that the students engage with the tutor. And the largest one statistically was assessment, unsurprisingly. So particular assessments such as exams, such as presentations, such as group work-based assessments could be a huge barrier to mental wellbeing for students, depending on how they were run and how the student experienced them and how well supported the student was. So these could also be enablers to mental health and wellbeing when they were done well. Following identifying what the barriers and the enablers were, I worked with staff and students, 116 staff and students across the Open University, to come up with ideas for solutions that would help mitigate these barriers, help reduce the barriers, and help the students have a better experience of distance learning. 3 of these areas mapped quite neatly to my taxonomy, you'll see, and so I've coloured them the same colours to make things easy. So there's the brown one, which was about solutions that we can embed in learning and study, such as inclusive curriculum design, supportive tuition, and assessment strategies and practices that support student wellbeing and are designed with student wellbeing in mind. The purple one on the left-hand side there, it doesn't look very purple on this screen, but I promise you it is purple, was about skills and confidence and the things that we can do to support students to build their skills and confidence and to be aware of their skills as they're building them, because so many distance learning students just aren't aware of the skills that they're gaining through their study. And it can often be the tutor's job to really draw attention to that and help them realise how far they're travelling and how well they're doing. At the bottom there, we've got the green section, which was on environments and the culture, the comms, the systems, the processes. Having a positive culture, having a positive atmosphere, positive distance learning environments, spaces to talk and share and connect. And then on the right-hand side there, you've got the blue section, which was about support, which was an extra area where interventions were needed to support student mental wellbeing. So support, it could include proactive wellbeing and study support from the institution, peer support, peer community, and wellbeing resources specifically to support student wellbeing. Following this project, this led into a 2-year, £350,000 collaborative project funded by the UK Office for Students, which is part of the government there, creating resources to support part-time distance and commuter student wellbeing. So do feel free to have a look at the resource there. There's a QR code for you there. We've got a whole load of resources that were co-created with students and staff specifically to support mental wellbeing and study for distance students. That's a rather whistle-stop tour of the student mental wellbeing side of things. But while I was working on this project, while I was working on positive digital practices, I became very aware of the staff wellbeing side of things and how very, very overlooked that was in higher education. So I started doing a little bit of work to try to identify this, try to research a little bit, try to uncover what some of the barriers and enablers to staff wellbeing were. Because you can't expect your students to be well. You can't expect your staff to be supporting your students to have well-being in education if your staff aren't well in themselves. And higher education isn't the easiest place for staff. It's not the easiest environment to work in. So I started doing a little bit of work on this in 2022, and I just put out a call on social media to people to try to understand what the barriers and enablers to staff mental well-being were. And this resulted in a blog post being written for SEDA, which is the UK Scholarship and Professional Learning. I'm trying to remember what SEDA stands for, and it's completely gone, so I can't remember what that stands for, but a great work for them. That identified some themes around barriers to staff well-being, particularly around academic culture, values, the university's values, and whether the staff felt aligned to them, being valued by your institution, whether staff felt like they were being valued, the leadership in the institution, the working practices, the restrictions, and the work environments. Things like contract type came in here, things like contract precarity. And also some kind of more intrinsic things, so around staff confidence, around staff self-awareness, and trust in each other, trust in the institution. It's a really interesting area, and once I started unpicking it, it led to quite a lot more work. You know how some of these things do? And so very shortly afterwards, I was invited to work on a report for the European Commission through NESET, Student and Staff Wellbeing in Higher Education Institutions. And that identified so many barriers to staff mental wellbeing. I'm going to start listing them here. I don't have a neat taxonomy yet. That's a future thing. But to start, I mean, just under the main theme of academic workplace culture, there was competition, the competitiveness that is intrinsic to higher education environments, presenteeism, which is absolutely rife throughout the entire European Union. Well, and Europe is, the UK is in that, believe me. Casualisation of contracts. So there are an awful lot of staff still on temporary contracts. Workload, and that goes from every single level. So I'm not just looking at lecturer level here, but right the way up to leadership level, the workload and what we place on staff. And the way that we glorify workaholism in the sector, the way that staff are expected to work so much in order to be successful to move to the next level on. The burnout that can come from that. Space efficiency and the way that universities are increasingly under pressure to have hot desking things and staff don't have offices anymore, and the way that we use the space that we have and the way that money is put into spaces as well was also a real barrier for staff mental well-being. It's really sad to say as well that this report uncovered that there are still so many inequalities and so much discrimination that still goes on in higher education internationally. This is not just Europe, this is the whole world at this part. But still, we're finding gender inequality is still absolutely rife. Race and ethnicity related discrimination is still very, very prevalent in higher education. Disability and ableism, so disabled university staff are still experiencing huge amounts of ableism in the sector. Homophobia and LGBTQ+ discrimination is still very, very prevalent as well. It surprises me in this day and age how many papers there were published on this and how much this is still very much an issue. There are inequalities for what we call the third space and professional services and the recognition of the staff who are not academic, but who do so much important work to keep the universities working, keep them afloat. And finally, inequalities in mental well-being and mental health literacy, and the way that mental health literacy is framed within universities, how the universities have this very tokenistic approach to trying to get staff to support their own mental well-being through maybe 1 or 2 days a year we'll hold some mindfulness workshops and expect you to give up time to go along to them. And then, but you still have to make up all of the work that's still going to be sitting there waiting for you at the end of it. And I just wanted to share a couple of quotes from this report with you. So the first one is, staff and student well-being are not separate issues, and they need to be considered as mutually dependent parts of the same ecosystem. So as I said at the beginning there, you can't expect your teachers to be supporting your students if your teachers are not well. So the literature suggests, and it's the author's firm belief, that working towards an integrated, holistic approach to staff and student mental well-being may be beneficial for all. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's very nice, yeah, holistic. What on earth does that mean in practice? One of the things that we drew attention to in the report was that it's essential that universities find ways to counter the toxic and competitive cultures of the past. We do need to move away from this competitive, individualistic nature that we have as universities and move towards a strategic vision, so top-down, that supports a culture of compassion, belonging and equality for staff and students. So really placing this at the centre of everything that universities do. And we need to be prizing and valuing compassion as a value that we will live by in higher education. So this report focused very much on campus-based universities. So now you might be asking, what about distance learning staff wellbeing? Well, I'm really excited to present this to you because I haven't presented this to anyone before. So this is brand new data. I'm super excited to share it with you. So last year, I was working as the head of academic professional development for Arden University. And this meant running training sessions, running our HEA accreditation process, academic mentoring, so supporting people with mentoring and progression, writing retreats, all of that good stuff, right? It's a wonderful job and I absolutely loved it. And what I was finding from staff is that they were telling me that it was really making a difference to them and their well-being as well. So I did a little bit of digging around and I had this hypothesis that academic professional development could support staff well-being, could support them with building a sense of community in a distance learning environment, could support staff sense of belonging, their confidence, and could help them feel more valued by the institution. So I ran a survey at the end of last year, and boom, unsurprisingly, it really, really did. So all of these green lines here on the left are all the people who agreed that this did actually have a positive impact on them. So we've got 3 measures of wellbeing, 2 measures of community, 2 of belonging, 2 of confidence, and 2 of feeling valued by the institution. So there is some variation, and I won't go into detail because I haven't got time today, but if anyone would like to find out more about the measures that were used and or the individual aspects of it, do let me know. But one thing I really wanted to mention as well, thinking back to what I was just saying now about the inequalities which are still rife within higher education, I also did a bit of digging to see if people of different particular demographics would experience this more than others. And unsurprisingly, they did. Well, I say unsurprisingly, I was really surprised at how much statistically significant data came out of this. So particularly looking at ethnicity and gender, almost all of the questions had some significance for particular characteristics. So almost all of the questions were statistically significantly more likely to have a positive impact on staff wellbeing for staff who were not white. So for ethnic minority staff. Almost all of them, all 3 of the wellbeing questions did. 1 of the community, both of the confidence, 1 of the belonging, and 1 of their sense of feeling valued by the institution. It was statistically more likely for staff who are not white to feel this more. Interestingly, the gender side of things as well. So we had 3 which were more likely for women and 2 which were more likely for men. And one of the things I just wanted to draw attention to was the difference here between community and sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is a really big thing in UK higher education at the moment. It's been talked about for about 18 months as a really something that all universities need to be working towards, the sense of belonging for students and staff. And so what was really interesting for me was that academic professional development was more likely to give women a sense of belonging. And yet it was more likely to give men a sense of community. And it was more likely to give men a sense of being valued by the institution, but more likely to give women that sense of well-being. It's so interesting, and I'm going to do a whole load more digging into it, and I will get something published, but as yet, you guys are the first people to see it. A couple more things, because I'm aware I'm tight on time. Unsurprisingly, contract type had a major impact on staff well-being as well. So I asked this question to permanent professional services staff, permanent academic staff, fixed-term professional services, fixed-term academic, and associate or 0 hours academic staff. I didn't get enough responses from the fixed-term staff to be able to share these with you. They were very small numbers. But the permanent academic and permanent professional services were much more likely to say that their contract had a positive impact on their well-being, which is the green line here, compared to the associate one, which is at the bottom there, the very much shorter green line there. I'm going to share a couple of quotes from you, a couple of quotes from the survey with you. Maybe some of these will resonate with some of the staff in your areas. I feel a gap between management and staff, a lack of belongingness. It's hard to feel a sense of belonging when all work is distance. I do not meet colleagues face to face, and as an associate, although everybody's lovely and will help when I reach out, it's hard to feel part of the team. The single thing that hinders my day-to-day is the huge volume of technology. I struggle to cope with my tasks because of all the IT aspects that I can't do. APD, Academic Professional Development, is a fantastic way to meet colleagues that you wouldn't usually work with. It definitely contributes to the community. It's just balancing workload to engage with APD that's the main challenge. From a wellbeing perspective, I'd like to engage with APD more, but I can't due to volume of work, which can create feelings of stress. And finally, without a clear, strong sense of development, I feel restless and unfulfilled. I've recently requested a mentor, so I hope this works. As you can see, there is a huge amount more work needed in this area. So for my final slide, I've got a few little thoughts on what I think is needed. I think we need to be doing interviews and surveys with distance learning staff in different institutions. I think we need to get a much broader picture of this than just Arden University and the Open University. I would love to establish a taxonomy of barriers and enablers for staff, like I did for the students. I think that would be a really useful way for us to be able to identify what the actual barriers are and what the actual enablers are. And I'm not talking about just EAPs and counselling and things like this, because we really need to be tackling the problem before it gets to that point. And finally, I would love to trial and evaluate some case studies of practice to enhance well-being, taking a kind of what works approach. So if anybody is interested in collaborating, do get in touch. I've got all my details here, and I'm happy to handle business parts later on. Thank you very much.
We recognize all the data you get and also the comments, especially the quotes. You can tell that a lot of universities, the feeling is there that one has workload, IT is often a burden, making time for extra non-teaching or research activities like development is also a problem. Asking for mentors, I see that at my university, staff is asking more and more for coaches, mentoring and all this stuff.
Yeah, really.
So we have a lot more to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So, George, the next part is a 5-minute part. How do I call that? Is it a commercial break or is it an advertisement for this afternoon? How do we call it?
Non-commercial break.
Non-commercial break.
By Diogo, it's an announcement of an event this afternoon, which everybody can follow online. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, that's okay.
Hello, everybody. Sorry for this formal presentation for today's morning session, but I think it's worthwhile. Yeah, so I will keep my 5 minutes. In fact, even not take 5 minutes. But this is to advertise for the afternoon event, which is a really interesting event, and I don't think we talk too much today in the morning about this, which is Microcredentials. It's the event name is the Sealing Deal Tamper-Proof Microcredentials with the EDC platform. The idea from EADTU is to explore how to unlock the potential of microcredentials while ensuring their integrity and transparency. It's going to be hopefully an insightful event where we delve into the world of tamper-proof microcredentials through the lens of European Digital Credentials Platform. So it will be a different approach to the topic of microcredentials. I promise I will be very quick in the afternoon also, while I do an introduction to microcredentials and to the MC project, which EADTU is also part of. This is a very exciting project where we have already some very interesting findings of the different projects that we are developing, but also there will be a team from Kurin Nobden, a team leader from Transparency and Recognition of Skills and Qualifications from the European Commission, which there will be a talk about transparency, recognition, and the role of e-sealing as part of this talk, and also Gilko Mazar and Kialikitalu will be talking about digital credentials, the European Digital Credentials for Learning. So both of them very relevant topics in terms of the transparency of microcredentials and sealing of microcredentials. So this will be in the afternoon. Stefaan will be sharing the link for this session, so I invite everyone to join us in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we come to the closing panel and the summit conclusion. For this panel, I invite Anna Gover from INPA. She knows all about accreditation, of course. Stefaan Hermans from the European Commission. And you heard him this morning, he knows everything about strategies. He knows everything about strategies and policy, politics and all this. And finally, Liz Marr, former president of EADTU, and now at the Centre of Online and Distance Education at the University of London.
Who knows nothing. They all know everything.
You are the former president of EADTU, so it speaks for itself. Okay, thank you very much. So now we use this microphone. Okay, we talked a lot this morning about different topics. Europe is facing rapid changes due to this digital transformation, climate change, innovation across all sectors, geopolitical and economic crises. And these changes, they reshape the society and economies. And of course, the policies that we are developing now will shape and determine our future also. Beyond initial higher education, and we've been talking for many years on that, lifelong learning, upskilling and reskilling are crucial to address these challenges. But we can also see that the participation rate in adult learning is disappointingly low. I have here some numbers of adult participation in lifelong learning. In the UK, it was in 2022, 11.9%. In Sweden, it was 35%, in Finland, 31%, and in the Netherlands, 27%. And those are the highest numbers of participation. Lowest shares are from Bulgaria, 2%, Greece, 4%, and Slovakia, Romania, Croatia, and Poland, 5%. However, the EU level target is at least 60% of all adults should be participating in training every year by 2030. So there's a huge gap. And I ask my first question to Stefaan, Hermans, and maybe also Liz. What's your reaction to this? How come that we evolve so slowly to this participation of adults learning, developing themselves further? Who wants to start? Just grab the microphone.
I know. You two knew.
Yeah.
I'll start. This is going to be a bit depressing.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm maybe going to depress you a little bit. I thought that the figures for the UK were really terrible, 11.9%. But you're looking at the lowest scorers in Europe, Bulgaria and Greece, 2% and 4% respectively. There's a long haul to get to that 60%. I think part of the problem is to do with what's missing. Particularly in the UK, there's been a lack of lifelong learning strategy. There's been commissions of inquiry, there have been all kinds of initiatives, but nothing structured and strategic to help the development. There's a lack of funding, and the funding has decreased over time. There's a lack of joined upness. So I've got a little list of positive things that could be done and should be done, I think. We need to have really clear, accessible pathways from the lowest levels to the highest. And Stefaan spoke earlier about maths and the foundations. Maths achievement in young people is really dire. It's not just, you mentioned Europe, but it's really bad across the world. And I'd like to set a challenge to everybody here, which is how can we teach maths better to young people so that we can get that foundation right? And I think that's something that particularly open and distance universities could focus on. So getting those foundations right, making sure that the pathways are there, making sure that the funding is there in an appropriate way so that those who can most benefit, at least afford it, are able to access it, making sure that there's a wider view of what constitutes accreditation and recognition. So thinking about microcredentials and other sorts of qualification, linking informal learning to formal learning so that people's informal learning in the workplace, in their community, can contribute to accreditation and qualification. And last but by very much not least, inclusive pedagogies and digital inclusion. Digital inclusion is really important, and it's not just about making sure that you've got Wi-Fi access and that you've got the equipment, It's also about having the wherewithal to use it, having the digital skills, and being aware of how it can be manipulated for misinformation and disinformation. So that's my little list of positives, but in a negative scenario.
That's a lot, Liz. Those are a lot of key factors, success factors that are needed, but still not put in place at the moment. So Stefaan, maybe you would want to respond to that from a perspective of the EU. What can we do to have the foundations right?
But maybe let me also first say the reference to the figures, there is also a measurement issue here, because there is a change in the way data are being used and the source of that. So I mean, just to put things a little bit in context. But I think there's also another dimension to this, and that is who is it actually that is not benefiting from this lifelong learning approach? And these are typically those who are already the most vulnerable. So these are the ones who start out with a low level of education. These are typically also people who will be working within the working environment where you actually have a very small staff number. You typically see small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think the key point that I want to come to is we have been talking about this lifelong learning for as long as I remember, but actually this jump forward we have not seen. And I think, I mean, the point that Liz made, I think is entirely correct. What is the strategy that we genuinely have, which is a comprehensive strategy, to make sure that everybody can be on board of this exercise? And that obviously questions not just on the offer that is there, but it's also a question clearly on having the access to it and the payment for this. I think this remains a big issue. But as long as we do only speak about lifelong learning and we stop there and there is no strategy, I think it will remain an issue. I think that's the first issue. And it's more than, once again, it's more than just talking about it. I also want to make a quick reference to, I think, the role of universities in this, because somehow I think it is rather fair to say that within the European Union, we have been lagging a little bit behind on actually finding a place for universities and also offering this. And I think even from the side of society, but sometimes even from public authorities' side, we still look at the university as the place where you do bachelor, masters, and then you do research kind of stuff. But that there's actually a lot more to it that can be done in terms of using and reusing and reapplying the knowledge that is also generated at the level of the university and actually transfer that further down. I think that actually in terms of an opportunity that is there in terms of continuing education is huge. Plus you really also have the opportunity, I think, as we are working much more now within alliances, in network, that you can bring research-driven universities, applied universities, but other actors together that actually can offer this kind of, let's, for the ease of reference, call it courses and course material that is being broadly offered of people who come with a different background. And I think this opening that you see actually makes me hopeful that we are there to reach many more people, to actually bring them in there. And I know I'm talking for a long time now, but I mean, also still want to say something on the role of the micro-credentials. Because one of the big issues obviously is related to the financing. And a lot of it in continuing education and lifelong education, there's also private cost to it. I mean, that's the fees that you pay, but that's your time and all those kind of issues as well. So you also want to make sure that when you do invest in that you actually have something that is standardized, that is hold on, that you can use in different types of circumstances. And I think also here the micro-credentials really offers an opportunity, particularly also to the universities, to be able to grant something, including to people who have not had the opportunity. So I think that's also another hopeful element, clearly, that I would see in that.
So you're talking about continuing education, micro-credentials, also a little bit about what should be in those micro-credentials. So the last things of innovation from research put into practice, no? That's so you expect learners to be, or potential learners to be more motivated if we would go on that route with micro-credentials and with that kind of content. Yeah, maybe one last word and then I go to Anna.
I think it's really an element for consolidating a value that is being created. And if you undertake the effort, that you also know for sure that it's something that you can take with you. But I think the same holds true for when you as an organization, you want to put money in it, and that's scarce resources, you also want to make sure that it's recognized, the value of that is recognized, and I think that's important in its own right.
Yeah. That's a nice bridge to you, recognizing micro-credentials. Anna, what's your perspective on this topic?
Yes, I think actually, as you were speaking, a couple of things jumped out at me, and one was this issue of recognition and recognition of prior learning. Because I think when we talk about lifelong learning and these percentages of adults that are engaging in training or education, I think we have a definition. What do we mean by that? Do we mean education and training that is somehow connected to the higher education sector? Or are we also talking about education and training that is offered within their workplace, but then is perhaps not recognized in the broader context? It's recognized within their workplace context, but it doesn't mean anything to take it outside. And then if you want to sort of access or progress back into the higher education sector, I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to recognition of prior learning, ensuring that those policies are in place and in practice, both at institutional level, but then also on national level as well. And I think this chimes then also very much with what you were saying about the kind of opening up of higher education and institutions, the greater connection with society, and perhaps we are taking steps towards stepping away from this sort of ivory tower perception of institutions as being, as you say, somewhere where you do your bachelor, master, and PhD, and they're very academic. And so I think those are some quite important issues. And then I think this issue of recognition is particularly important for micro-credentials, also with the sort of permeability between different education sectors. We still have some countries where there's quite a separation between the academic universities and professional higher education institutions, and then of course that which is more connected to the workplace. And I think here, when we talk then specifically about micro-credentials, where we need to pay a lot of attention is the clear information about the micro-credential, both in terms of what's included in the certification that they get at the end, but very importantly about the information that's provided to the learner at the start of that journey. And I was thinking quite a lot about this when listening to today's first presentation about retention. And I think there's perhaps a lot of focus on retention during the educational journey, but we need to look very carefully about the information that's provided at the start of that, so that learners know what it is that they are signing up for. And I think this is particularly relevant for micro-credentials, where we see that some of the work that ENCA has done, we've seen that many micro-credentials, they don't have defined learning outcomes. So how is it that a learner is supposed to know that this micro-credential is going to meet my needs and my expectations? What is it that I'm actually going to gain, A, during it in terms of the skills or knowledge that I'm going to get, and B, at the end of it in terms of the certification I'm going to get, and what it is that I can actually use that for later. And then in parallel, what are the expectations towards the learner in terms of the workload? What is going to be the learning approach, the competences or knowledge that are expected in order to be able to understand the content of the micro-credential?
Can I ask you, because those things are all in this European framework, you have to define the workload, etc., and also the learning outcomes. So if you have that as a given, how can you motivate learners to follow such a micro-credential when it's not clear, not sure, we still don't have the culture, what the value is of a micro-credential? How do you see that within Europe?
I think the problem is the assumption that it's a given. I mean, we have these frameworks at European level, and a lot of work has been done in that in recent years, but it's actually not happening in practice across the board. So, I think there is a lot of work to do in ensuring that the expectations that have been set out at European level are actually put forward in practice, because we can't expect learners to engage with micro-credentials if it's not clear what it is that they're getting out of it. So the frameworks are there, but the practical implementation.
So my next question would be a follow-up question to all three of you. Do you know of any institution on national level remarkable examples? Are there certain countries, schools, or systems just a little bit more advanced in this micro-credential, implementing them, and how did it work out? Do you know?
Well, I mean, I speak very much from the quality assurance perspective. That's my area, and I think there are some countries that are perhaps a bit further forward. Ireland is the obvious example in terms of really having a national level framework for micro-credentials, in terms of how they are then referenced with the national qualifications framework, ensuring that they're expressed in ECTS, and that the learning outcomes are clearly formulated. And there are other countries that are also now building this into their quality assurance systems, so that when the quality assurance agency looks at the institution, they are checking that these things are happening. So it's certainly work in progress.
You want to add?
Yes, I think it's really, the UK experience is really interesting because FutureLearn, as many of you will know of, had a big drive towards micro-credentials, and there are a lot of micro-credentials on the FutureLearn platform from different institutions. But what was interesting is that the devolved nations did more, and they put funding in place. So in Scotland, in Wales, and in Northern Ireland, there was funding made available to support people to take micro-credentials as a form of upskilling for employment purposes. And that was direct funding to the students to allow them to do that. And that's a really major step, I think, in embedding that in a developmental framework around skills for work and skills for development.
So we also talked about this morning a little bit about personalization. Liz, how does it fit in personalization and the micro-credentials, and even further? What did you hear this morning about personalization, and how could we implement that institutionally? Do you have a view on that?
I'd say it's very hard. Can I say that?
Yeah, it's very hard, of course, yeah.
But yeah, I think there's I think what Anna just said about recognising prior learning is really important here, because you're recognising what the student brings with them to their learning experience and accrediting that or recognising that as an important component. And that is very personalised. In fact, it's individualised. And so I think that would make a major difference. But I'm really aware that in some countries in Europe, it's not possible to do it. And I think open universities maybe have a role to play here. They are open, the clue is in the name. So let's lobby for being more open in terms of recognising what people bring with them and converting that into credit in ways that we can develop between us, and making that a collaborative process so that the consortia of institutions across Europe can work together to make that happen. And I think then you'll get steps towards more personalisation. But the other challenge we heard earlier is about the data and how you collate the data, how you categorise it, how you use it, how you make sure that people are using it. I think there's immense benefits potentially also from generative AI and some of the things that are happening there. So yeah, there's lots of possibilities, but it is quite hard. We've got to recognise that, but then take that structural, strategic approach to making it happen.
Sorry, there's also a question from the chat. Sure. So we also give some attention to the online participants regarding this actually. Somebody asked, personalized education sounds nice, but is it feasible for students and staff? Is AI not potentially detrimental to personalized learning and intrinsic motivation? That's the question. And who wants to answer? It's going to be a difficult one, but.
Well, maybe a bit indirectly, because actually I wanted to comment on this issue of personalisation, and I was really impressed by the presentations heard today. Some of this is quite new to me, but I think we also have to be a little bit cautious, and I think this chimes with the question from the audience about accepting the limitations, and this links back to what I was saying earlier about making clear to the prospective learners what they can expect to get out of the course. And this is whether it's a micro-credential or a full degree program. Because I think we also have to accept that we cannot be everything to everybody at the same time. So, we also have to accept where or explore where the limits of personalization are in order to ensure that the outcomes at the end of that learning experience are somehow comparable if they're going to be certified and used later, and make that clear to the learner at the start of their journey. So that they know what the flexibility is within the parameters of what it is that they're signing up to, and what their expectations should be in that regard.
Exactly. That's we saw that at the presentation of credentials at the FernUniverstität. Just make clear what the workload is and what it stands for. We cannot include everyone. We can also not serve every student, because we are just also regular universities. We also have an accreditation system. We also have our reputation, so we cannot go under that. That's a problem. Yeah.
Indeed, and I think if I can just make one more point from the quality assurance perspective,
Yeah.
what's interesting, and this is particularly in relation to kind of full degree programs, is and this is written into the European standards, these kind of principles of curriculum design, that it's coherent, and we talk about approaches of constructive alignment of curriculum, not just within the individual courses but the whole program. And now what we're seeing is a tension between that and the demand for flexible learning paths from the student perspective, but also from the policy perspectives, that institutions are expected to make flexible learning paths available to their students, and I see quite a tension there that we haven't really resolved.
Oh, that brings me to another question. How flexible is your employer in this movement of flexibility and letting go of certain, curriculum, not restrictions, but advices on alignment and all this stuff?
Well, I mean, from
is it changing also in your work?
Well, I mean, from ENCA's perspective, we're looking in the next couple of years at revising the standards and guidelines for quality assurance in the European higher education area. And as I say, one of those standards relates specifically to curriculum design. And I think there will be some discussion there about how we balance sort of coherent and logical curriculum design with the need to allow for flexible learning paths, and again where the limitations are, being realistic about
exactly. That. Interesting. Stefaan, I saw you grabbing the microphone. So
I don't want to be provocative, but I think we also have to avoid that lifelong learning is being perceived as getting in prison, and that you're locked into a system, because I think we are narrowing down very much what lifelong learning and continuing education will just is and can be. But also, I think what you offer, certainly as distance teaching universities, but I think in general, what many universities have on offer within the continuing education, because there's a lot of opportunities that are being offered where, I mean, we have a lot of flexibility and freedom for yourself to accustom yourself with certain knowledge, which may be through MOOCs, for instance, for which you can simply sign up. You can do it at your own space and things like that. So I also think it is important to keep it sufficiently wide open, because the path on the micro-credentials, it's a very valuable and specific path, but it is not the only path which is relevant. And I think that also has a very strong message, I think, and the easiness for people to be able to sign up to things that actually would be beneficial for them, for their own development, for their professional development, for actually maybe preparing steps that they want to undertake. So I think it's also something we have to be aware of.
But you're holding the microphone, so I think you were talking about in the introduction also about your new digital action plan, and it was recently reviewed. And can you just give us the highlights and what are the steps ahead, and does that help us to move any further?
Well, the Digital Education Action Plan runs until 2027. So in 24, we are somewhere in the middle. We just launched kind of a review on it. I think the most important thing I would like to focus on is particularly the commitment that has now been made with the member states on the basis of structured dialogue that has taken place with them, where the specific needs are. And I mean, some of them is clearly around the, let's say, the digital ecosystem in which you operate, infrastructure related, access to the infrastructure, all those kind of things. And obviously with new developments that take place nearly every day, right? So that's clearly one item in there. And then the second one is really related to the development of the skills themselves. And the way that actually will be part, I think, also of our working life. And clearly, I mean, that is a dimension in the initial education, if I may put it like that. But certainly also for any continuing education that will be taking place. So that's really at the center of this. And then, I mean, it really unfolds in a whole range of issues. I mean, it's not just on the ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence anymore. I think clearly, I mean, the stuff you've been talking about also around the personalization, the way artificial intelligence can help, but also the way the whole digital infrastructure can help us on that. I mean, this is clearly a pathway that we need to walk down to. So also looking at this differently, I think there's a growing awareness that education and digital education are not two separate worlds, that it actually is in our interest that it is one and the same, so to speak. So that is education, and you do have a digital component, that EdTech is a part of this. And there are whole discussions going on within the European Union, how many hours of access and what moment in time can you have your laptop at the moment that you not need. I mean, but okay, that's a very valuable discussion. But I think that the other issue then clearly is also that what do you exactly do with this within the school environment, or even in your case in the higher education environment?
Yes.
Can I just follow up a little bit on that, slightly tangentially, but relates to Anna's remark about reviewing the quality frameworks. And I think one of the consequences of COVID, which we saw, was a loss of trust in online and distance providers because of poor quality provision by universities that had no experience or background in that and had to shift suddenly to an online delivery. And I think that quality assurance frameworks and tools like e-excellence are there to help institutions meet the required standards. And that is absolutely crucial, because if you give people a poor digital experience, they're not going to learn, and they're just going to struggle, possibly impacts on your retention figures. So I think that quality is a really important element for us.
Okay, Stefaan, are there online questions? And I also want to give the participants in the room, of course, the opportunity. Are there remarks, comments, or anything else for the panel, or something to add? Please. I continue with the microphone, otherwise.
It's more a remark. So microcredentials, it's not happening. And the question was, how do we motivate students or learners? How do we motivate people, adults, to take microcredentials? But that's not enough, I think. We have to look to the whole ecosystem. There's also the question, how do we motivate institutions to organize or take microcredentials? And how do we motivate employers to send people or to allow people or to stimulate people to take microcredentials? And I wonder what is done, for example, in the UK about the employer side.
Yeah.
And
maybe I have to stand a little bit different from the
audio. That was my comment.
Okay, thank you. True. I think that's the other side also. How are we motivated to go in that direction with lifelong learning and offer enough? Are there other remarks, comments, questions?
I was curious about the flexibility and the personalization element in terms of quality assurance, because we were having a discussion yesterday about personalization and personalization and how we were as an institution able to develop more personalized learning for our students without the constraints of quality assurance in our national countries. So what kind of what kind of discussions are you having at quality assurance agencies in terms of allowing for more flexibility in curriculum design to ensure that we are able to develop these personalized learning paths?
Thanks. Yeah, I think this varies considerably, and some agencies are discussing this, and others really not. Actually, COVID was a bit of an impetus for this, and I give very simply the example of, this is not so much flexibility in terms of learning path, but flexibility in terms of delivery. That in some countries it was very strictly regulated the percentage of a course that could be delivered online in order for the certificate to be awarded at the end. And if it was defined as an in-person bachelor degree, then only a very small or even none of that could be delivered online. And obviously COVID all shifted, and I think this opened up quite a lot of discussions about how more flexible this should be. I think one of the core issues will be the links between quality assurance tools, both that we have the framework that we have at European level, and then how that's translated into the national level, and the links with the other tools that we have within the Bologna process. So the use of ECTS, the referencing to the qualifications frameworks, because I think these are kind of the core parameters within that, within which flexibility can occur. But I think we need to make sure that that these existing tools are at the core of how we define the sort of the educational pathways, not in terms of content, but in terms of the sort of parameters that we use to describe them.
Thank you. Well, we were going to wrap up this panel, but not before I have one last question for all three of you. We heard a lot this morning, and probably also for everybody a lot of new knowledge. Can you give me, all three of you, the short takeaways from this morning? For your personal. Stefaan doesn't have any.
I'm just trying to reduce it to one.
Yeah, just one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I think I want to refer to the work on retention, because I think that's really important. And it's important because of the student. And we're here because of students, not for us, for our students. And creating a revolving door does nobody any favours, not the student, not the universities. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to help students to succeed and to meet their success criteria, which might not be the same as ours. So we need to understand that. And I think the way we do that is listening to student voice. So if you don't have students involved in your in your program committees and on your boards of study, contributing to your thinking about curriculum, you're not really engaging people in an academic community. So that, I think, is my takeaway. Retention needs student voice to make it work.
Thank you.
I'd like to start from the perspective that I think of the debate that you also see in society and the economy, and that is how much is still diploma driven and how much is skill based. Because on the one hand, I think you do have a very important dimension where actually your initial diploma, bachelor, master degree, etc., I think is actually a very important part. And then clearly when people start, that they deliver on that, it's a priority. I mean, not just for you as an institution, for the staff who works there, but clearly also for the people who have actually taken that step to go down that path and then not disappear demotivated. Although I would challenge some of the personalized stuff and how I see some of, or at least how I interpret some of it at this moment in time. Because personalized, I think from what we are looking at, is an instrument, is a tool to help a group of students to actually achieve learning outcomes that are expected. It is not to send them off on a path which may be different from the rest of the gang. I mean, they need to come to the same destination. And there clearly, I think that's where we certainly would be looking at the personalized component and the personalized learning, that it actually does help to cater to the needs of those different students. Because what we see right now, I think on many fronts is that people do start, but they do not come to the level of skills that we would actually expect in the type of education that they are reading. And obviously that may lead to not attaining a certain degree or something like that. So that's certainly one element. But I think also when you go then on, let's say, the more skills-based part, where actually employers would say, I mean, it doesn't matter what diploma that you have, as long as you can demonstrate to us that you're capable of doing this. I think we know it very strongly in the IT sector, for instance. You have a huge gap and you have lots of people in entry positions who come in with a certain personal development that they have had through whatever way it may have been. And that clearly you can see the benefit, I think, also from an enterprise perspective, that you have people with completely different sorts of backgrounds that are confronted with similar kind of challenges that you know in terms of upskilling, reskilling, adjusting, new technological developments, for instance, new protocols that have been introduced, that you do know that at the level of the university, one has worked on and is developed very well, that you can actually then incorporate this into this kind of material that can actually be certified at the end of the day by something that is recognized and for which quality assurance is being given. I think working actually on those two paths, I think remains really a challenge.
Thank you. And final words.
Sorry, no, I have one. Sorry, thank you. And mine doesn't squeak, so I'm not so much anymore. Yeah, I think for me, it's really about communication, and I think this picks up on some of the things you've said. So it's about communication in terms of institutions and policymakers understanding what the expectations of students are, as you said, and also of industry and world of work, and you know, looking at how we can build those in, but also communication in the other direction, setting, managing expectations so that the learner is not unrealistic about what they're approaching. And I think here we need to be very careful also about the language that we use. I mean, we're sitting here talking about micro-credentials, and you know, in some circles we talk about micro-credentials as if this is something that's been invented in the past few years, and it's really not. I mean, you know, we know that these small units of learning have been around for a long time, but we have a different language now that we're using to talk about them. And I think particularly within the higher education sector, if we want to break down those silos between higher education, professional development, world of work, we need to be thinking about the language that we're using, both on a professional level and towards students, and ensuring that that language is accessible for those that are listening to us. And you know, the quality assurance crowd are very, very guilty of this, of using very technical jargon, and nobody else knows what we're talking about. So you know, we have to look internally as well, but I think that's a really key thing to keep into consideration, so that we don't have conversations where actually we're talking about the same thing using different words, or sometimes talking about different things but using the same words and not realizing the discrepancies.
Thank you very much. Thank you all three for participating in this panel and for your insights today. Maybe we can have a hand for them. I want to apologize for this microphone. Some things can happen. I want to thank you for participating this morning. I hope it was valuable for you and for your work and for your practice. We still have one part left, and that's the network lunch, and that's going to start in 2 minutes, I believe. So thank you for this year, for this summit. I hope to see you next year, maybe in between also at the annual conference in Cyprus. I hope you have a safe trip back home and enjoy your day and your lunch. Thank you.